Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we try to illuminate complex topics and bring you truly essential knowledge.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into a sector that, well, I think it often feels misunderstood. Not-for-profit organizations.
Absolutely.
And I've always been curious about the term itself, not-for-profit. Does it really mean no money? Or is that a common misunderstanding we should, unpack first?
Yeah, that's definitely the biggest misconception, and it's good we're starting there. We need to clear that up right away.
Okay.
Many not-for-profit organizations do actually generate an excess of income over expenditure. They often just call it a surplus.
Surplus. Okay.
So it's not really about if they make money, but crucially, it's about what they do with it.
Right.
And our mission, I guess, in this deep dive is to give you a shortcut to understanding what really distinguishes these organizations from, say, your typical profit-maximizing company. We'll look at their different forms, their unique objectives, how they actually measure success, which is different, and some of the specific challenges they face. And we'll focus a bit on charities, too.
Okay, so it's way too simplistic, then, to think not-for-profit just means no profit.
Exactly.
This surplus sounds like it's effectively profit, but the difference is more about, semantics and purpose.
That's a great way to put it, semantics and purpose. The key isn't whether they end up with extra money. It's about their fundamental reason for existing and how they handle that surplus income. There are basically three core distinguishing features.
Okay, what are they?
First, unlike most businesses, NFPs typically lack external shareholders who provide risk capital.
Right, no shareholders looking for a return.
Precisely. And that fundamentally changes their financial structure, their accountability, everything.
Which makes sense. So if there aren't external shareholders, I assume they're not distributing dividends either.
You got it. No dividends. So any surplus they generate, that profit, as we might call it, stays within the organization.
Okay.
And that retained surplus then becomes, another source of capital for them. It allows them to reinvest directly back into their mission.
So it fuels the mission itself.
Exactly. Think of it this way. For a traditional company, surplus is often seen as money for the shareholders.
Right.
For an NFP, that surplus is literally more fuel for their fire, as you said.
Yeah.
It's not just kept. It's a direct accelerator for achieving their goals.
And that frees them up a bit, presumably, from short-term demands?
Hugely. Frees them from the pressure of external investor demands, allows for genuinely long-term planning. And that links to the third, and maybe the most defining characteristic, their objectives.
Okay.
These organizations always have objectives that include some kind of social, cultural, philanthropic, welfare, or environmental dimension.
So they're filling gaps, essentially.
Yes, they're designed to address needs that wouldn't be met efficiently, or sometimes even at all, by the traditional market system alone.
Right. So it's really about the purpose and how they channel those funds, not just if they have extra cash. And this isn't just one kind of organization, is it? It sounds like a really diverse landscape.
Oh, it truly is. Very diverse. Not-for-profits exist right across both the public and the private sectors.
Okay, give us some examples. Public sector first.
Sure. In the public sphere, you'll find organizations set up to provide essential public goods. Things like medical care, museums, art galleries, maybe certain transport services that might not be available at the right price otherwise.
Right.
And then there are services like national defense or market regulation, which, simply couldn't be provided through the market at all.
Makes sense. And when most people think not-for-profit, I suspect their minds jump more to the private sector. What does that look like?
Yes, that's probably true. And that's where you'll find the vast majority of charities, of course.
Okay.
But also things like self-help organizations. Think housing associations for low-income groups, for example. Sports associations like Football Supporters Trusts.
Oh, interesting.
Scientific research foundations. Environmental groups. It's a much broader and more vital category than many people perhaps realize.
That's a really impressive range. So we've established they're diverse in purpose, but how does that translate into their sort of legal identity? Are they all structured the same way legally, or is it more of a patchwork?
It's definitely a patchwork, yeah. Not-for-profits can be incorporated bodies or they can be unincorporated.
Okay.
In the public sector, they might be direct departments or agents of the government. Some public bodies are even set up as private companies, limited by guarantee.
Limited by guarantee. What does that mean exactly?
It means instead of having shareholders who own stock, they have members who pledge to pay a set, usually quite small amount, if the organization winds up with debts.
Okay. Not owning shares, just a guarantee.
Right. For instance, in the UK, an organization like the Financial Services Authority, the regulator was set up that way.
Interesting. And for the private sector NFPs, what are the common structures we might see there?
In the private sector, you commonly find cooperatives. These are fascinating bodies, owned and governed by their members, usually on a one-member, one-vote basis.
Right, democratic ownership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You also see things called industrial or provident societies, often member-owned too, focused on community benefit or welfare.
Okay.
Then there are trusts. These are entities specifically set up to achieve certain objectives. They have independent trustees who are legally bound to manage the funds strictly according to those objectives.
So the trustees have a legal duty.
A very specific legal duty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many private foundations are set up as trusts. And of course, NFPs can also be limited companies or sometimes just operate as simple clubs or associations.
That distinction is really clear. A cooperative run by members, a trust with legally bound trustees managing funds for a specific purpose. It really underlines that purpose-driven aspect you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. And this ties directly into how their objectives work. Not-for-profit organizations are, well, invariably set up with a clear purpose or maybe a set of purposes. And these are intended to continue way beyond the lifetime of the people who founded them.
Built to last, then.
Exactly. Their constitution, whether that's the memorandum and articles of association for a company or just a set of rules for association, it's all designed to make sure these core objectives can't just be changed on a whim.
That sounds like a crucial difference from a typical business where, objectives might shift quite a bit with market trends or new leadership.
It is a key distinction.
So for NFPs, the broad strategic objectives are pretty much locked in by their founding principles, right?
Generally, yes. The broad strategic objectives tend not to change much over time. They're dictated by those founding principles.
Okay.
However, and here's where it gets really interesting, the focus of their activity can actually change quite significantly, but still stay within those broad objectives.
Oh, okay. Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about the British Know-How Fund. This was set up by the UK government to provide development aid. In the 1990s, it actually switched its focus quite dramatically.
How so?
It moved away from supporting the newly emerging Central European nations and turned its attention towards African nations instead.
Right.
The core objective, providing development aid, remained exactly the same. But the geographical focus adapted to changing global needs and priorities at the time.
That makes sense, adapting the how and where while keeping the why.
Precisely. And financially, looping back to that surplus idea, even though they're not profit maximizing in the usual sense, many are still expected to generate a surplus just to survive and grow.
I'd imagine external funders, grant providers would probably expect them to be pretty self-sufficient, or at least try to be.
That's spot on. Yeah. Even if they rely heavily on external grants, the funders providing that money almost always expect the organization to be as financially self-reliant as possible.
So they need good financial management.
Absolutely. They need to manage their resources incredibly effectively. And because conventional accounting ratios, things like return on capital employed or return on investment.
Yeah, those don't really fit, do they?
Not really. They aren't suitable for measuring success against the social mission. So NFPs rely on a completely different set of measures to assess their performance.
Okay, so if the bottom line isn't profit in pounds or dollars, then for NFPs, success must be measured in a totally different way. How do they actually track if they're, making a difference?
It's a fascinating shift in perspective, isn't it? They focus not on shareholder returns, but on, usually a trio of key metrics.
A trio, okay.
First, effectiveness.
Yeah.
Basically, are they actually achieving what they set out to do? Are they meeting their objectives?
Makes sense. What's second?
Second is economy. Are they doing it smartly? Getting the most out of every pound, every dollar, every resource they have. This is often assessed through quite rigorous cost containment.
Right, being careful with the money.
Exactly. And third is efficiency. This measures the output of the organization, whatever that output is, maybe services delivered, people helped, per unit of resource consumed, input versus output.
Effectiveness, economy, efficiency, the 3 E's.
That's a good way to remember it. And many service-oriented NFPs also use what they call value for money indicators.
Value for money, okay.
And because they often have a high degree of public accountability, especially charities, they frequently publish their performance outcomes. They want to transparently show how funds have been used and what's been achieved.
So it's a completely different way of looking at success, prioritizing impact and responsible resource use over just financial return.
Absolutely.
And what about their management structures? Do they look totally different from traditional corporations? Or are there similarities?
There are definitely similarities, although the specific terms might differ. They might have a council or a board of management instead of a board of directors.
Right, different labels.
Yeah, different labels. But the underlying structures generally resemble profit-maximizing organizations.
Yeah.
Their primary role, however, is absolutely laser-focused on making sure the organization adheres to those founding objectives.
Sticking to the mission.
Always. What's quite interesting here is that there seems to have been a bit of a convergence in recent times.
How so?
We're seeing an increasing reliance on non-executive officers, sort of like non-executive directors in companies, to provide scrutiny and oversight.
Okay, bringing in outside perspective.
Exactly. And also the employment of professional career executives to actually run the day-to-day operations. It's about bringing in specialized management expertise, especially as the operating environment gets more complex.
That makes a lot of sense. Professionalizing the management while keeping the mission focus.
Precisely.
Now, you mentioned earlier we'd take a deeper dive specifically into charities. They're a type of NFP, but what makes them unique even within that broader not-for-profit world?
Right. Charities are a very specific and, frankly, vital type of not-for-profit. They're essentially defined by benevolent giving for philanthropic purposes.
Philanthropic purpose, okay.
And beyond the general NFP characteristics we've already talked about, charities typically have 5 additional distinguishing features.
5 more. Okay, let's hear them.
First, they exist entirely to benefit defined groups or causes in society. Their purpose is purely beneficial.
Okay.
Second, because their purposes are seen as philanthropic, they usually receive favorable tax treatment. Think tax exemptions or reliefs.
Ah, the tax breaks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that favorable treatment means they have to be registered with a regulator, like the Charity Commission in the UK.
So that tax advantage definitely comes with strings attached, oversight and accountability.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Which leads to the third point. Their activities are often restricted or limited by that regulator to ensure they stay within their charitable purpose.
Right, keeping them on track.
Fourth, they fundamentally rely on financial support from the public or from businesses, or sometimes both, to actually achieve their objectives. Donations are key.
Okay.
And fifth, and this is a huge one, to be financially viable and maximize their impact, they often rely very heavily on voluntary, unpaid managers and workers.
That reliance on volunteers seems like a massive distinguishing factor. It's almost like a unique form of, well, capital, isn't it? Human capital.
It really is. It's fundamental to how many charities operate and what kind of activities fall under this charitable umbrella.
Yeah, what counts as charitable? Is it just helping the poor?
Oh, it's much broader than that. While specific legal definitions do vary a bit by country, the categories recognized in, say, the UK's Charities Act, 2006, are pretty broadly accepted globally as defining charitable purposes.
Okay, like what?
Well, the prevention or relief of poverty is definitely one, but also the advancement of education, religion, health, community development, supporting arts, culture, heritage, science, amateur sport,
Wow, okay.
human rights, conflict resolution, environmental protection, animal welfare, even promoting the efficiency of emergency services like police, fire, ambulance.
That's a really wide scope.
It is. These are generally activities you wouldn't typically associate with purely commercial organizations. And as I mentioned, in the UK, they're overseen by the Charity Commission, which is itself a type of NFP regulator.
So how do these charities actually operate day to day, given this huge diversity in activities and their reliance on donations and volunteers? I'm picturing everything from tiny local groups up to massive international organizations.
And you'd be absolutely right about that diversity. Think about an organization like Oxfam. It's a huge federal international organization made up of, I think, 13 different affiliated bodies operating across continents.
Huge scale.
Massive scale. Then at the other end, you literally have thousands upon thousands of small local charities run entirely by volunteers, maybe operating out of a village hall or community center.
And do they use different structures, like the companies and trusts we talked about?
Yes, their structure often reflects their scale and complexity. Unsurprisingly, the larger constituents within a big federation like Oxfam often operate as limited companies.
Right.
Whereas smaller local charities might prefer simpler structures, maybe just being established as unincorporated associations.
Okay. Now, here's something that I think might surprise people. It certainly surprised me a bit when I first learned about it. Can charities actually engage in commercial activities? like run businesses. I always thought that was forbidden.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception, but it's actually a fascinating fact. Charities are not forbidden from engaging in commercial activities. There's a crucial condition, though.
What's the catch?
The condition is that these commercial activities must fully serve the charity's objectives. Any profit generated can't go to private individuals.
Ah, okay. So it has to support the mission.
Entirely. A great, very viable example, especially in the UK, is the retail shops run by many large charities. Think British Heart Foundation, British Red Cross, Age Concern.
Yeah, you see them on every high street.
Exactly. These are effectively profitable businesses. But any company that's formed to operate those shops is legally expected to formally covenant or promise its entire annual profits directly back to the parent charity.
So every single penny of profit from selling donated goods goes straight back into funding heart research or disaster relief or helping older people.
Precisely. The profit isn't for private gain. It's all channeled right back into the mission.
That's a really important clarification. And what about big non-current assets? Say a charity owns buildings or land. How are those managed to make sure they always serve the charitable purpose?
That's another area with specific safeguards. For charities holding significant non-current assets like real estate, ownership is usually vested in independent guardian trustees.
Guardian trustees.
Yes. Their role is absolutely crucial. They ensure these valuable assets are deployed and managed in a way that reflects the charity's stated objectives and also satisfies all the requirements laid down by the Charity Commission or whichever regulator applies.
So extra layers of oversight for the big stuff.
Exactly. It's a pretty complex system, all designed to safeguard the charity's purpose and its assets for the long term.
It sounds like a constant dance, then, between maintaining that core founding purpose and adapting to new realities or opportunities. You mentioned earlier that while their founding purposes are specific, they can sometimes evolve. How does that work in practice for charities?
Well, the underlying purpose generally have to remain consistent with the original intent. But yes, the scope or the focus of their activities can definitely expand or vary over time.
Like the Oxfam example you gave.
Exactly like the Oxfam example. Remember, it started as the Oxford Committee for Famine Relief back in 1942. Its initial, very specific purpose was relieving famine in Greece, which was caused by the Allied blockade during the war.
Right, very specific time and place.
Very specific. Today, Oxfam provides famine relief and development aid on a truly worldwide basis. The core mission tackling poverty and famine is constant, but its geographical scope and the range of its activities have broadened dramatically over the decades to meet global needs.
That's a huge evolution in scope. Are there other examples of charities having to adapt how they meet their objectives because the world around them changed?
Oh, absolutely. Think about Barnardo's. It's a well-known children's charity in the UK. Originally, it was famous as Dr. Barnardo's Homes, providing residential homes for orphans and destitute children.
Right, the children's homes.
Exactly. But after World War II, things changed. The UK developed more comprehensive state welfare services. And socially, there was an increasing willingness and ability for families to adopt and foster children.
So less need for the big institutional homes.
Precisely. There was less reliance on them. As a result, Barnardo's had to fundamentally adapt its approach. To keep maximizing the welfare of vulnerable children, its core mission, it had to shift its focus towards providing other kinds of support services, not just residential care.
So again, the why stayed the same, but the how had to change significantly.
Exactly. It really shows how their operational objectives, the focus of their work, can change quite radically due to shifts in the external social or political environment. They have to keep asking, what's the most effective way to fulfill our mission now?
That's a powerful example of necessity really driving evolution in the sector. But with all these complex operations, the reliance on donations, the volunteers, the changing world, what are some of the crucial risks that charities face? It surely can't all be smooth sailing.
No, you're absolutely right. They face some very significant strategic and operational risks. Well, for international aid charities, like Oxfam again, major strategic risks include things like country risk, the political or economic instability in the places they operate, currency risk, fluctuations affecting the value of donations or aid, and just the inherent danger of operating in politically unstable or conflict-affected environments. That directly impacts their ability to deliver aid safely and effectively, and the safety of their staff and volunteers.
Yeah, those sound really serious. What about operational risks, day-to-day stuff?
Operationally, probably the biggest one for many charities is that high dependence on volunteer workers we talked about.
Right, the volunteer workforce. What are the risks there?
Well, it raises questions about continuity. Can you always rely on having enough skilled volunteers? There can be internal control issues sometimes, just because the workforce is transient or less formalized. And maybe crucially, looking ahead, will future generations be as willing to volunteer their time for free?
That's a big question.
It is, and at the same time, it's often incredible. Exactly. And there's also evidence, particularly in places like the UK, with a very high density of charities, of something often called charity fatigue.
Charity fatigue, what's that?
It's the idea that the public can feel overwhelmed or pressured by the sheer number of different competing charities and fundraising appeals they encounter.
Yeah, you do get a lot of requests.
Right. And the potential effect is that people can become a bit desensitized or even disinclined to donate at all. It makes it a real challenge for charities to stand out, connect with donors, and secure the funding they need in what's often a very crowded landscape.
That's a lot for these organizations to navigate. So, okay, to sort of bring this all together for our listener, thinking back over everything we've discussed, what are the key takeaways from our deep dive into not-for-profit organizations today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that NFPs are not defined simply by a lack of profit. That's the starting misconception we need to ditch. Instead, they're defined by their fundamental social purpose, by their unique governance structures like being member-owned or having trustees, and by their distinct ways of measuring impact, focusing on effectiveness, economy, and efficiency rather than just financial returns.
Purpose, governance, impact measurement.
Exactly. And because of that, they play this truly vital role in society. They provide services, they address needs, they champion causes that the traditional market system often doesn't or can't cover efficiently. They really are crucial pillars supporting the fabric of our communities and society as a whole.
It's clear they're a dynamic and absolutely essential part of our world, constantly adapting, as you said, to serve their missions against quite a complex backdrop.
Absolutely.
So as you, our listener, reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this question. Given the increasing complexity of the issues not-for-profits are tackling today, their ongoing reliance on external support like donations and volunteers, and this ever-evolving social landscape we've touched on, what do you think is the biggest challenge or perhaps the biggest opportunity facing this sector in the coming years? And maybe how might our collective understanding of impact need to evolve to truly reflect the immense value they bring?